Hello everyone and welcome back to the 2020 Tata Steel Masters edition. It's Alireza Firouzja versus Anish Giri, one of the candidates of the 2020 Candidates Tournament, and some of you said that I'm pronouncing Firouzja incorrectly, that it's actually Firouzja, but as I do not know how to pronounce surnames from Iran, if any of you are from Iran, do comment in the comment section below, is it actually Firouzja and not Firouzja? But okay, that being said, let's check it out as it's a very instructive game. So without further ado, Alireza opens with d4. And like we said, so far after 4 rounds, Wesley So is in the lead. After beating none other than Alireza Firouzja. I'm gonna go with Firouzja unless you guys actually decided it's Firouzja. But okay, c4, we have e6, knight to c3, and bishop to e7 by Giri. We have c captures on d5, e captures on d5, and now bishop to f4. So strengthening the center, Giri plays c6, we have queen to c2, Alireza develops the queen, and knight to f6, preparing the castle. We have e3, and now that the bishop is out of the cage, Giri immediately starts attacking it with the knight to h5, since the queen left the d1 square. So bishop to e5, getting out of the way, and now Giri continues pursuing the bishop. We have knight to d7. The g7 pawn is defended, so it's not a problem. And now bishop to e2. This has all been played before, basically offering knight captures for bishop captures on h5. And there is one game, well, there are actually 3 games where knight back to f6 was played, but in those games black didn't really achieve any wins, and I think only one game ended in a draw that black went back with the knight. So knight captures on e5 by Giri, we have d captures on e5, now taking away the f6 square for the knight and saying what do you want to do with the h5 knight. g6 by Giri, and now bishop captures on h5. We have g captures on h5, and now Alireza already gave up not only one of the bishops, but both of the bishops. So it's going to be a very interesting game how the 2 knights will pair off against the bishop pair in this setup. So knight g to e2, preparing to bring the knight over to f4, and now f6. Now this position has been reached before, and f6 is the top move recommended by the engine, so this is still, I believe, preparation by both of them. We have e captures, bishop captures, and now rook to d1. As the queen is still on d8, so moves like e4 come into mind where black will be unable to capture, and so on. So here there is one game where queen to e7 was played, but here Giri just castles kingside, and it is as of move 14 that we have a completely new game. Now if you look at it, okay, I mean, it doesn't seem like the greatest castle of all time, since all the king's pawn structure is really messed up here, but Alireza doesn't have any bishops, so it's not going to be all that easy to attack the black king, especially with the dark square bishop so nicely covering this diagonal, and the light square bishop will of course also help out with the defense if he's perhaps gets this diagonal. But okay, Alireza castles, and we have king to h8 now. Also Giri might have some ideas of using the g file for attacking the white king. We have e4 now, as we already mentioned. Now the queen is still on d8, so you cannot capture, and now d4 by Giri. And Alireza, of course, ignores it, since Giri will not be able to capture either. We have knight to f4, just improving the position of the knight, also putting pressure on the h5 pawn. But Giri makes it impossible to capture pawn. He goes bishop to e5, now attacking the knight. And now if you capture the pawn, then queen to h4 just puts white in a losing position, since this is now the threat of checkmate. Your knight is hanging, checkmate is being threatened, you also unpin, so d captures on c3 is a threat, and the white will simply not be able to take care of all of the threats. So after bishop e5, we have knight back to d3. Now with the idea that if you capture now, then just knight captures on e5 opens up a discovery here, but black will really feel the absence of the dark square bishop. For example, if queen to f6, you're just going to capture on c3, and now it's going to be really problematic for black to play. Like even a normal move, bishop to g4, just the rook to d6, and white just gets too much out of the position. f4 is coming next, you're going to play f5. And of course, the rook cannot be captured due to the double check from the knight and the queen, and after you move, well, just knight captures on d6 wins the game. So after knight to d3, Giri just goes back, bishop to g7, and now we have knight back to e2. preparing to form an attack against the d4 pawn, but also making it problematic for black to defend the pawn with c5, as the queen and the knight just guard it. And b6 is just met with queen captures on c6. So h4 by Giri, preparing to push h3, so Alireza pushes h3, not allowing it. We have queen to e7 now, putting pressure on the e4 pawn, and now e5, asking, do you want to capture on e5? And it's really not a pawn sacrifice, and even if it was that black was winning a pawn, you do not want to give up your dark square bishop, since it will be extremely hard to defend the position. For example, if captures, captures, and captures, you even win back the pawn with the immediate rook captures on d4, so really there's no point for black in doing this. So after e5, rook to d8, putting the rook behind the passed pawn, makes sense. And now Alireza goes for f4, just cementing his passed pawn here. And now if Giri allows f5, f6, it's just game over. So he has to prevent it. He continues development, bishop to f5, getting the bishop into the game, nicely pinning the knight here, and also preventing the further expansion of the pawns. So king to h2, now Alireza frees the g1 square for the knight. He wants to go knight g1 to f3, and then, well, see where he's going to take it from there. We have queen to e6 by Giri. A better square for the queen, also pressuring the king side, pressuring the a2 pawn. But Alireza simply continues with knight to g1. And now, what do you play here? Well, Giri continues, bishop to h6, now puts pressure to this pawn. Now if knight to f3, then the pawn will be, you will be able to capture the pawn, since the knight is pinned and the pawn will be undefended. But Alireza plays it anyway, and it's a really interesting idea. Because if you go for this bishop captures on f4, then you get knight captures on f4, because yes, bishop captures queen, but the black queen is also under attack. So here we would have captures, captures, now you would have captures, captures, and now again you would have bishop captures on f3, and now before recapturing, first you deliver a check on f7, and after the king moves, only now you recapture, and Alireza ends up being up a piece, of course, completely winning. So, after this knight to f3 move, Giri first prepares the capture with queen back to e7. Now, the bishop will be able to capture, since after the knight f4, the queen is no longer on e6. So, king to h1, and now, well, king to h1, Alireza does not want bishop captures on f4 to come with check. He prepares a little surprise. Bishop captures on f4, and now, well, you win a pawn, but also you put your two bishops in front of the rook on f1. So queen to c5, attacking Giri's queen on e7. We have queen captures on c5, knight captures on c5. Now it could be dangerous after the knight moves, as both of the bishops are, in front of the rook. So bishop to c2, bishop to c2 while attacking the rook, making it impossible for the rook to attack the bishop, since the bishop covers the dark squares. We have rook captures on d4 now, putting pressure on this bishop, and now rook captures on d4. We have knight captures on d4, and now both of the bishops are hanging, but it's not a problem, since Giri has bishop to e3. And now going for if captures, then captures, but Alireza just goes knight c to e6. And this is one of the examples where the two knights really are dominating the bishop pair. So bishop back to g6, and now rook to f3, pushing the bishop further back. Of course, Alireza does not have a problem with trading bishop for a knight, as well he eliminates Giri's bishop pair. So bishop back to h6, and now knight to f5. And here Giri has to make a decision whether to capture on f5 or to further continues evading the knight with the bishop. So one of the options, of course, is bishop to c1. You go after the b2 pawn. After b3 is played, then you go rook to e8. You have to get the rook into the game. And now we get this very interesting position. For example, knight fg7 guards the knight. You don't want to move the knight, otherwise you lose the pawn. And here the rook is under attack, so you have to move the rook. But now it's just a weird position when you have the knights guarding each other. So if bishop to h6 could be a problem for white, then you might bring the knight back, but then Giri might bring the rook back, so we could have a nice draw by repetition. So it's really weird Giri decided to not go for this. But okay, after knight to f5, Giri in fact decided to trade here. Bishop captures on f5. Rook captures on f5, and now, although you could start by not that, but bringing the rook into the game immediately, first bishop to e3, controlling all of the squares. The knight has to retreat, now preparing to attack it with rook to e8. And here, rook to f3, now attacking Giri's bishop. And here, again, bishop to c1, just moving the bishop would seem like the way to go. But Giri just decides to go into a rook and pawn endgame. So here we have rook to e8 by Giri. And Alireza obliges, of course. Rook captures on e3, rook captures on e6, and now king to g1, starting to bring the king into the game, which is what you always want to do in an endgame. King to g7, we have king f2, king to g6, and now rook to e4. And now it's a bit of a problem for Giri, since if king to f5, then you lose this pawn, then these pawns become weak. And another problem is if king g5 defending, just rook g4 check. Again, if you move the king, the pawns will fall, and if you continue defending with something like this, then rook g7, again, you have problems defending. So here, Alireza's position is just much more active. So instead, Giri went rook back to e7, but now king f3. Alireza starts improving the position of his king. King to f5, and now we have a trade. Rook captures on h5, king captures on e5, and now rook to e4 check. Alireza forces to go into a king and pawn endgame. We have king to f6, and now rook captures on e7. King captures on e7, and now king to f4 and king to f6. So if you look at it, it's equal material. Alireza has a bit more of an active king, since the king is already on the 4th rank, and he has a 2-1 advantage on the king side, and there's a 3-2 advantage on the queen side. So Alireza starts with g4, preventing Giri from playing h5 to control the 2 pawns with 1 pawn. And now here's the really impressive moment of the game. Like, Giri has to make a move. So it's if he plays h6, Alireza will just play h4, and again ask Giri, what do you want to do? You have to decide what to do with the queen side. Another thing, if you play something like b5, then b4 just completely eliminates all of your play on the queen side. If instead of b5 you go c5, just a4, and again black has very limited play on the queen side. If b6, just b3. If a6, you will again play h4, and there's a problem. If b5, then you just go a5. And here, if you want to create a pass pawn with c4, captures and king e4, and the black king cannot reach any of the pawns here, but the white king will just pick off this pawn, and it will be a winning endgame for white. So that's the problem for Giri. So in the end, Giri decided for a5. But now, pause the video, and with the information I've just given you, feel free to find the best and the winning move for white while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on being such an excellent endgame player. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's a4. This is why it's important. You have to eliminate black's counterplay on the queen side. And by eliminating black's counterplay on the queen side, it means that b5 isn't good for black. If b5 was possible for black, then it wouldn't be a problem for Giri. However, if b5, it's incredible, but we actually reach an endgame. If you've ever seen the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer with young Josh Waitzkin, well, I'll just show it to you. If b3, of course, you want to defend, you don't want to create any passed pawns. B captures on a4, and now, okay, you have a passed c pawn, c5. We have h4, c4, and now you start bringing the king. King e4, c3, king to d3, and now king e5. King captures on c3, of course the black king goes after the pawns here. King to c4, king captures on g4, king b5, king captures here, and now the two outside pass pawns, like in the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. King g5, black makes way for the pawn, king b6, white does the same. Okay, it's not the same because in the movie the promotion came with check, so we're not gonna set it up like that here. Okay, h5, we have a5, h4, a6, h3, a7, h2, and now a8. Queen guards the queening square. So it's a very poetic endgame. So that's why after Alireza's a4, b5 runs into a dead end. And without the move b5, there's just nothing to play for Giri. So Giri, of course, played h6, but now h4. it's Geary's move. There's no good move here. If you try something like here, just G5 or even G captures on H5, it doesn't really matter. You create a defended pass pawn, that's just game over. And if king to E6, then which was played in the game, Alireza just plays G5. We have H captures on G5, king captures on G5, now creating the outside pass pawn. King to F7 by Geary, king to F5, and now B5 by Geary. But here Alireza just played king to E5, and it was in this position on move 51 that Anish Geary resigned the game. And an excellent victory for Alireza Firouzja, who catches up to Wesley So as the two leaders of the tournament. So really impressive play against one of the candidates of the 2020 candidates tournament, Anish Geary. Now the reason he resigned here is, well, the king has to stay here to keep an eye on the outside passed H pawn, and you don't have anything to play on the queen side. For example, well, I mean, whatever you play, B4, you cannot break through. The king will just come here, pick up this pawn, pick up this pawn, pick up this pawn. It's there are no moves here. So yeah, really impressive stuff by Alireza, and a couple of weird decisions by Geary in the endgame, giving up first the bishop pair, then trading into a rook endgame, then just go into a king and pawn endgame with a worse king position. So and in the end, it all culminated in Alireza winning this beautiful endgame. So I also prepared the standings. Here they are. After 5 rounds, there you have it, Wesley So and Alireza Firouzja with 3.5 out of 5. Then Fabiano Caruana, Jordan Van Forest, and Vladislav Artemiev with 3 out of 5. With 2.5, we have a lot of people: Jeffrey Shiong, Yang Krzysztof Duda, Vishwanathan Anand, Magnus Carlsen, and Daniil Dubov. Carlsen and Yang Krzysztof Duda still just chilling, each with 5 draws. Then with 2 points, Anish Geary and Nikita Vityugov. With 1.5, Yu Young-gi and Vladislav Kovalev still struggling in last place with 1 point, only 2 draws. But that's that's the difference between the Challengers and the Masters edition, it would seem. So yeah. That's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Daniel Levy, Andrea Malvasio, Pieter Stenkes, Robert Kretschmar, and Bjorn Eivind Holm for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Tata Steel Masters edition, the coverage of the Women's World Chess Championship, and of course, the newly started Paul Morphy saga. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.